Welcome to Sayers and Secrets, where intellect glimmers through the rain and every riddle hides behind civility. Tonight's mystery begins at Claridge's, where a midnight toast turned to tragedy, and Hercule Poirot must trace the perfume of deceit through crystal and champagne. Before we begin, ask yourself, when mercy becomes deception, who truly drinks the poison? Pour yourself something warm and let the mystery begin. The champagne still hissed faintly, a single golden thread escaping from the bottle's lip and pooling across the linen like liquid guilt. Around the table, 12 guests remained frozen in the glittering wreckage of midnight, crystal overturned, perfume mingling with the metallic scent of spilled drink. It had been a celebration for Sir Reginald Dane's return from Cairo. It ended with his sudden collapse, face down in the last toast. An anomaly, his glass lay upright, untouched, yet his fingers were sticky with champagne. A contradiction, every guest swore the butler poured equally, but the decanter stood lighter by one precise measure. "Lock the doors, if you please," murmured Colonel Vance, red-eyed and bewildered. "No one leaves until the police arrive." "They will arrive sooner than you expect," came a calm voice near the doorway. Hercule Poirot had been dining 2 floors below, summoned by a flustered maître d'hôtel who spoke of tragedy in the palm room. Now he entered as though the scene were a tableau prepared for his inspection. His grey eyes travelled from the glittering chandelier to the champagne stain, then to the guests, each breathing too shallowly, each rehearsing innocence. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said gently, "I beg that you remain exactly as you are. To move would be to disturb truth before it has arranged itself." Lady Dane, the widow, clutched her fan like a weapon. "You mean to examine us here?" "Where else, madame? The clues are still warm." Poirot bent beside the fallen man, touching the rim of the glass with a fingertip. "Observe. No lipstick, no trace of effervescence. Yet the hand, sticky. How curious." The butler stammered. "I poured, sir. Each guessed the same." "Exactitude can also conceal selection," Poirot replied. He straightened, eyes flicking toward the mantel clock. "Ah, midnight precisely. The hour of symmetry. Crime often chooses it to seem poetic." Vance rubbed his temples. "You think it's murder, then?" Poirot looked at the decanter. "I think champagne does not kill the healthy English gentleman so neatly, mon ami." A sigh rippled through the room. Someone's bracelet clinked against glass. The air seemed to thicken with scent. Gardenias, candle wax, and the faint smoke of extinguished sparklers from the terrace outside. Poirot's gaze paused upon that scent. He crossed to the window. Open, yet the terrace deserted. But there, an imprint of a heel, not from dancing shoes, from boots freshly polished. Lady Dane's nephew Charles laughed too quickly. Any number of people could have stepped out for air. "Possibly," Poirot said. "Yet the heel points inward, not outward." Someone returned. Inspector Hale of Scotland Yard entered briskly then, his notebook ready. "Good evening, Monsieur Poirot. Thought you might be here. Another accident among the titled." "Non, mon ami," Poirot replied softly. "An arrangement, precise, deliberate, like a toast rehearsed too well." Hale gestured to the servants. "Get everyone's statements." Poirot stopped him with a small wave. "Allow me first a question of my own." He turned toward the guests. "Who proposed the final toast?" A silence fell so complete that the ticking of the clock seemed indecent. Then Lady Dane whispered, "He did. To the past, and to those who never return." "The past," Poirot repeated. "Always it clinks its glass before striking." He inclined his head. "We shall respect his eloquence by listening closely to it." He moved back to the table, folding a napkin over the untouched flute. "This will tell us more when the laboratory has spoken. But already I see a pattern of contradiction. The glass that was not drunk from, the toast that was meant to bind, and yet—" He paused, eyes narrowing on the portrait above the fireplace. Sir Reginald depicted 10 years younger, holding a silver cup identical to the one now toppled near his hand. Poirot's moustache twitched. Ah, symmetry again. How the English love it. The clock chimed once. 12:15. Poirot turned slightly, gaze catching Lady Dane's trembling fingers. "Madame, forgive me. You wear no rings tonight," she started. "They're being cleaned. Yet your knuckle bears a mark still red, recently removed." Her eyes flinched away, meeting instead her nephew's. Across the table, the pianist who had provided music for the evening coughed nervously. The scent of gardenias deepened. Poirot smiled faintly. "Bon, the scene arranges itself." He addressed Hale again. "Let us send for the chemist and a list of every bottle served. Meanwhile, none shall retire. The night has been festive. It must end orderly." As he spoke, a waiter entered carrying a tray of fresh glasses, unaware of the stillness he intruded upon. One of them slipped, striking the floor with a clear chime, and the widow gasped so violently that everyone turned. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Madame? I thought it was a shot," she whispered. "Ah," Poirot murmured, bending to pick up the fragment. Fear transforms every sound, but sometimes fear remembers the sound it has already heard. The others stared, uncomprehending. Poirot laid the broken stem carefully beside the dead man's glass, as though completing an equation. The gardenia scent lingered heavier than before, drifting from somewhere that was not the bouquet on the table. "Messieurs, mesdames," he said at last, voice low. "We are in the presence of order disturbed. To restore it, I must ask questions that may sting like the champagne bubbles you so admired." Outside, distant bells of St. James tolled the quarter hour. Poirot lifted the decanter, holding it against the light. Tiny flecks glimmered at the bottom, too heavy to be sugar, too fine to be dust. His brows rose. "Interesting." Then softly, almost to himself, "A toast to clarity. Yet one finds sediment." He set it down. "Inspector, we begin with the servants. Truth often hides where deference stands." And as Hale turned toward the butler, Poirot's gaze shifted once more to the terrace door, now slightly ajar, though no breeze stirred. The gardenia scent drifted outward into the corridor, like a secret trying to escape. The faint perfume drifted toward the corridor again, curling past Poirot's nose like an insinuation. "Close the door, if you please," he said softly. "Let us not allow the truth to leave before it has spoken." The waiter obeyed, trembling, the tray still quivering in his hands. Poirot's eyes followed the gesture, precise and slow. "Set the glasses down, mon ami," he continued, "and tell me, were you present when Sir Reginald gave his final toast?" "Yes, sir," the waiter stammered. "He raised the glass himself. I thought he drank." Poirot inclined his head. "You thought, but your eyes saw what?" "I was turning away, sir." "Always," murmured Poirot. "In the turning away, the essential is missed." He moved to the table once more, examining the faint smear on the napkin beside the untouched flute. "Inspector Hale, a magnifying glass if you have one." Hale fetched it from his pocket, grumbling something about continental thoroughness. Poirot ignored him, adjusting the lens with care. "Look here," he said, gesturing to the rim. "A dusting of fine white. Yes, even under the glint of light it remains dull, not crystalline. Sugar it is not." Lady Dane half rose, catching her breath. "You mean poison?" "I mean," said Poirot, "an interference, something that has no place in a celebration." The widow's hand fluttered toward her throat. The gardenia pinned there trembled. Poirot's gaze lingered on the bloom. "A rare scent, madame, and powerful. Do you cultivate them yourself?" "They're from the hotel hothouse," she replied faintly. "Reginald always insisted they be sent to our table. A habit." "Ah, Poirot murmured. Habits are the fingerprints of the soul. He reached into his pocket, producing a small envelope. With surgical precision, he brushed a few grains from the glass into it, sealing it neatly. For the chemist, and now we turn to the servants. The butler, Grant, stepped forward. I arranged the place settings, sir. The champagne was already chilled. I poured at precisely 5 minutes to midnight. From one bottle? Yes, sir, the last of the Easel. Bollinger. Poirot lifted the decanter again, its contents glinting faintly under the chandelier. Curious, he murmured. The cork of Bollinger is dark brown. This was sealed with pale gold foil. Perhaps an oversight? Grant hesitated. I borrowed the foil from another, sir. The original tore. And the cork itself? I discarded it. Poirot's brows rose a fraction. Discarded symmetry, eh? Yet symmetry defines this evening. Hale frowned. Meaning what, exactly? Meaning, said Poirot quietly, that every gesture here, every toast, every flower, echoes another. Only one gesture fails to match. The host who did not drink. Charles Dane interjected with sudden sharpness. If you're suggesting my uncle suspected something, you're wrong. He was boasting, as usual. Boasting of survival? Poirot asked. The young man's face hardened. He'd been in danger abroad, yes, but that's all over. I think you're reading superstition into tragedy. Poirot's tone remained mild. Perhaps. Yet superstition leaves traces upon the living mind. Inspector, you will find it written often in such cases. When men return from peril, they sometimes arrange their deaths to feel safer from them. A nervous laugh escaped the pianist at the far end of the room. You mean he planned it? Poirot turned slowly. Non, monsieur. I mean someone else planned that he should seem to have planned it. The pianist swallowed. The silence that followed was filled by the low ticking of the mantel clock. Steady, judicial, merciless. Poirot paced once around the table, his shoes whispering over the carpet. Lady Dane, he said suddenly, a question most delicate. When your husband left Cairo, did he bring gifts, trinkets, souvenirs? She hesitated. A small chest of stones. From a tomb, I think. And were they insured? I believe so. Charles arranged it. All eyes turned to the nephew. His smile was thin. A formality. The papers are in his study upstairs. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Excellent. We shall view them later. But first, Monsieur le Coroner, you will recall the champagne. Was it poured from a fresh bottle? Yes, said Vance. I saw Grant open it. Then, my good butler, Poirot said softly, why is the opener dry? The cork has been removed, yet the implement shows no trace of moisture or pulp. Grant paled. I wiped it after, sir. Ah, Poirot murmured. After what? The man faltered. After I noticed something odd. The liquid in the neck seemed cloudy. Cloudy, Poirot repeated. And you served it still? I thought the chill had done it. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. No, my friend. The chill reveals, it does not conceal. He moved to the sideboard, opening the small ice bucket. Inside, 2 half-melted cubes floated beside a torn label. Pale gold. Poirot extracted it carefully. Voila. The ghost of our substitution. Hale bent forward. You think the bottle was changed? I think, Poirot said, eyes gleaming, that the hand which poured meant to offer death in celebration and perhaps to hide in the toast of another. He turned again to the terrace door, where the gardenia scent still trembled in the air. The sound of distant carriages drifted faintly from Piccadilly, the rhythm echoing the pulse of the clock. Poirot reached out, running a finger over the latch. Moisture glistened there. Condensation? Asked Hale. Or champagne, Poirot murmured. But why outside? He knelt slightly, inspecting the floorboards near the sill. A crushed petal lay there, white, waxen, bruised. The perfume, it travels because its source has moved. Madame, he said gently, turning back toward Lady Dane, you wear only one flower. Was there another earlier? Her eyes darted toward her maid, who shook her head almost imperceptibly. Perhaps, Lady Dane whispered. It fell when I leaned over him. Poirot smiled faintly. Perhaps. Yet the bruise is from a shoe, not from sorrow. The remark rippled through the room like a chill breeze. Lady Dane sank back into her chair. Poirot folded the petal into a handkerchief and placed it in his pocket. Inspector Hale, he said, see that none of the guests depart. Each will write a brief account of their movements in the last hour. Truth prefers to appear first, on paper. Hale nodded and began issuing instructions. The guests murmured, restless, while the butler fetched pens and sheets from a nearby desk. The scent of gardenia seemed sharper now, almost medicinal. Poirot watched the widow's trembling hand guide her pen. The ink spread unevenly, blotting once where a tear, or a drop of something more chemical, had fallen. He noted it without comment. The clock struck 1. Poirot's gaze returned to the terrace door. For an instant, in the glass reflection, he thought he saw movement, a shadow passing silently beyond. But when he turned, there was only darkness and the faintest echo of a footstep fading down the corridor. Poirot moved without haste toward the corridor, his reflection merging with the darkness that had just swallowed the fleeting sound. "Close the door again, if you please," he murmured. "When the air escapes, so does the truth." Hale obeyed reluctantly, his expression skeptical. "You think someone slipped away?" he asked. "I think," said Poirot, eyes narrowing, "that guilt always tests the perimeter before it settles." He turned back to the table where the guests bent over their sheets of paper. The scratch of pens filled the palm room, uneven, tentative, like whispers translated into ink. The perfume of gardenia lingered heavier now, clawing against the starch of linen and the faint tang of champagne. Poirot crossed to Lady Dane first. "Madame, you have finished?" She nodded, weakly. "I wrote everything, from the moment the orchestra stopped to the instant he fell." "Bon, and you, Monsieur le Colonel?" Vance lifted his page, gruff. "Clear enough, I hope. I didn't move from my chair." Poirot accepted the papers one by one, scanning each briefly. The pianist's writing trembled like his hands. Charles Dane's, bold and controlled. The butler's was neat, almost military. Poirot stacked them in precise order. "Now," he said softly, "we listen to the handwriting." Hale frowned. "You mean read them aloud?" "Non, mon ami. We listen with the eyes. The ink tells us who hurried and who rehearsed." He compared Lady Dane's sheet with her nephew's, lifting both toward the chandelier's glow. "Observe, the lady writes in fragments. Stops, starts, hesitation. The nephew, continuous flow, no crossings out. Yet his account contains times too exact. At precisely 12:05, I fetched a handkerchief. At 12:10, I resumed my seat. Who notes the minute of a handkerchief unless he fears its omission?" Charles flushed. "You're suggesting I'm lying?" Poirot smiled gently. "I am suggesting, monsieur, that precision can also be camouflage." The young man's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what my uncle was like. He controlled everything, even our movements. If I seem precise, it's because he taught me to be." "Touché," murmured Poirot. "And yet, the master who controls breeds the pupil who rebels. It is a most curious symmetry." Lady Dane's fan snapped shut with a faint click. "Inspector Hale," she said sharply, "are we to endure this foreign philosophy all night? My husband is dead, not staged for entertainment." Poirot's eyes softened. "Madame, death is always theatre to the living. It demands an audience. We simply decide whether we watch or participate." He turned to the butler. "Grant, You will read your statement aloud, s'il vous plaît. Grant cleared his throat. I poured. I waited. I collected the glasses after the fall. Nothing else. Poirot's head tilted. Collected. You handled them all? Yes, sir. I set them on the sideboard. Poirot's gaze shifted swiftly. And the untouched glass of Sir Reginald. Did you move it? The butler hesitated. Only to steady it. It was tipping. Then you handled it after the event. Of course, sir. Then, my good man, the fingerprints will tell us more about concern than about guilt. Poirot turned aside. We must secure that glass immediately. Hale motioned an officer to lift it carefully onto a tray. Poirot watched, satisfied, then approached the pianist, who seemed ready to crumble. You, monsieur, your name, please. Howard Lake. Bon, you play beautifully. I try. You played tonight, did you not? Until the toast. Yes. Then Sir Reginald insisted I join them. He poured my glass himself. Poirot's eyebrow arched. He poured yours? Yes. I was surprised. He said, music deserves its own blessing. Then he sat, raised his glass, and the man's voice broke, and fell. Poirot regarded him with grave sympathy. Monsieur Lake, when he poured, did you notice which bottle he used? The same as the others, I think. It came from the ice bucket. The one where I found the torn label. Lake nodded slowly. Yes, I remember the glint. Excellent. Poirot turned toward Hale. You see, the substitution took place before midnight. The poisoned bottle was among the last. Lady Dane's lips trembled. Then any of us could have... Precisely, madam. The symmetry of opportunity. Yet motive remains asymmetrical. It chooses. He began to pace, hands clasped behind his back. The ticking clock punctuated his thoughts like deliberate commas. Sir Reginald returned from Cairo, he said aloud. He brought stones, perhaps of value, perhaps cursed, who knows? They were insured by his nephew. His butler poured champagne that was not quite champagne. His wife wore gardenias, one of which lies crushed by a shoe near the terrace, and his musician received a personal pour. He paused, turning to them all. Does no one see the shape of this design? Hale muttered. Looks to me like confusion. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, mon cher Hale, confusion is but order unrecognized. He lifted Lady Dane's statement again, reading silently. Here she writes, after he fell, I called for help. But Grant, you wrote, her ladyship cried out before he touched the floor. A contradiction, small but sharp. Madame, you cried before he fell. Her face drained of color. I thought he stumbled. No, you thought he was poisoned. She stared at him, eyes wide. That's absurd. Poirot's voice softened. Madame, your instincts spoke before your reason. They always do in the presence of guilt or of love. The room held its breath. Charles' hand gripped his aunt's shoulder protectively. Poirot noticed the gesture, the reflex of possession, and tucked it silently into the file of his mind. He set down the papers. We shall rest our tongues for a moment. The air grows heavy with perfume. He crossed again to the window and opened it slightly. Cool night flooded in, thinning the gardenia scent to a trace. Voila, he murmured. Sometimes clarity requires only a change of air. Outside, the hotel courtyard gleamed under drizzle, wet cobblestones reflecting the orange lamps. Poirot's gaze caught something at the base of the balustrade, a faint glimmer, like a droplet that refused to fade. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. Inspector Hale, he said quietly, bring your torch. Hale joined him, shining the beam downward. There, caught between two stones, was a fragment of glass, clear, curved, and bearing a thin line of gold foil. The bottle's neck, Poirot whispered. Broken clean, someone smashed it before replacing the rest. But why toss it outside? Hale asked. Poirot's lips curved slightly. Because the act was impulsive, yet the plan was not. We approach, mon ami, the rhythm of guilt. He turned back into the room, letting the window remain half open. The scent shifted again, no longer oppressive, merely lingering, like a memory that refused dismissal. Poirot surveyed the guests, his expression serene. It grows late, but the truth, she is not sleepy. And tomorrow, when daylight enters this room, she will stand revealed, as uninvited as death, yet far more punctual. The half-open window stirred slightly in the London drizzle, the faint breath of damp air bending the candle flame and drawing the scent of wet stone into the room. Poirot reached out to steady the flickering light. "There," he murmured. "Now we see truth more clearly, never by brilliance, always by steadiness." Hale rubbed his eyes. "You plan to keep them here all night, do you?" "If the night keeps its secrets, yes," Poirot replied. He turned from the window, glancing once more at the champagne glass, resting under the bell jar the inspector had placed over it. "I must examine one last detail before the laboratory steals it from us." He leaned close. Mon Dieu, how eloquent a surface becomes when disturbed. With his nail, he traced the sticky residue that ringed the stem. "Do you smell it, Inspector? Beneath the sweetness, there lies bitterness." Hale sniffed cautiously. "Smells like almonds." "Precisely." Poirot's moustache twitched, but not the bitter almond of cyanide, no. This is subtler, something mixed to deceive the senses, a perfumed poison. Lady Dane's voice trembled. "You're saying the scent, the gardenias, masked it?" "Or imitated it," Poirot said quietly. "A fragrance layered upon another, like virtue concealing sin." He turned suddenly toward Charles. "Monsieur, you smoke, do you not?" "Yes," Charles said, frowning. "What of it?" "Your cigarette case. May I?" Charles hesitated, then produced a silver case from his pocket. Poirot opened it delicately. A faint trace of powder clung to one corner, visible only under the candlelight. Hale's brow furrowed. "What's that?" "Champagne residue," said Poirot, brushing it onto a napkin. "The same grain as on the glass rim. Our symmetry tightens." Charles stiffened. "You're implying I imply nothing, monsieur. I observe. One smokes near the window, perhaps. One's sleeve grazes the table. It is possible the powder travels like gossip. From glass to cloth to skin." The nephew glanced instinctively at his cuff. A small stain, almost invisible in the dim light, marred the fine fabric. Poirot's gaze followed it mercilessly. "Remove your jacket, if you please. This is absurd. Absurdity often introduces revelation." Hale stepped forward. "Best to comply, sir." Charles exhaled sharply and shrugged off the jacket. Poirot laid it flat across the back of a chair, studying the faint mark under the beam of Hale's torch. The light caught a shimmer, a thin line of dull gold. "The bottle foil," Poirot whispered. "Transferred by haste. Someone handled the bottle roughly, tearing the seal." Charles's voice rose. "You think I poisoned my own uncle?" "I think," said Poirot, still calm, "that you tore the foil. Whether through guilt or fear we shall determine later." Lady Dane rose, trembling. "He would never. He adored his uncle." "Adoration, madame," Poirot said gently, "may turn to resentment when inheritance is delayed." Charles's eyes flashed. "You've no right." "I have only observation," Poirot interrupted, "and observation is the most democratic of rights." A tense silence followed. The rain pressed harder against the window. Each drop sounded like the slow tick of an unseen clock. Poirot drew the gardenia petal from his pocket and placed it beside the stain on the sleeve. The hue of bruising matched the edge of the fabric precisely. "You see," he murmured, "the fabric remembers what the mind denies. Both bear the same trace of pressure." Hale crossed his arms. "So the lad stepped on the flower. Doesn't prove he killed anyone." No, said Poirot, but it proves he moved when he should have been still. Charles swallowed. I followed my aunt to the terrace. That's all. She was upset. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet earlier you wrote that you did not move from your chair. The young man faltered. I forgot. Mais non, Poirot said softly. You remember too much. You edited. Lady Dane's voice broke. You have no compassion. On the contrary, madame, I have compassion precisely because I understand the cost of deceit. He turned from them both, studying the pattern of candlelight across the floor. The reflection wavered against the puddle of champagne. Poirot knelt, touching the liquid's edge with his fingertip. Still sticky. It has not been an hour since it spilled. The pianist's voice quivered. What does that mean? That someone cleaned quickly, but incompletely. Poirot stood, brushing his hands. The poisoner's greatest weakness is the vanity of neatness. He faced the guests again. We are close, my friends. Close enough to smell the truth beneath the perfume. It clings, persistent, like the gardenia that hides decay. Hale looked weary. And what do you expect next? A confession? No, Poirot replied. I expect dissonance. The guilty cannot keep rhythm when truth begins to play its tune. He crossed to the grand piano where Lake sat motionless. Poirot rested his hand on the polished lid. Play for us, monsieur. Something soft. Music reveals what words conceal. Ka hesitated, then struck a hesitant chord. The sound filled the room, fragile, trembling, human. Poirot watched the faces around the table. Lady Dane's lips pressed tight, Charles staring into the floor, the butler rigid at the wall. Bon, Poirot murmured. Listen to the notes between the notes. There lies intention. As the melody rose, the window pane quivered from the distant rumble of a carriage below. The air stirred again. Gardenia and damp stone intertwining. Poirot's eyes moved to the glass tray where Sir Reginald's flute stood imprisoned beneath its dome. Tiny bubbles still clung to the dregs of liquid, rising lazily and bursting one by one. Inspector Hale, he said, barely above a whisper, when bubbles persist after death, they speak. They say, someone wished the scene to appear still alive. Hale frowned. Meaning? That the poison was delayed, not immediate. It struck precisely when applause would have drowned any gasp. Poirot's gaze fixed on the pianist's hands, trembling above the keys. The music faltered. Ah, he said softly. And now, monsieur, you hesitate. Lake froze. My fingers slipped. No, Poirot said. They remember. The dead man poured your glass himself, did he not? But perhaps you handed him the bottle. The pianist's eyes darted toward Lady Dane, then away. Merci, said Poirot, satisfied. One glance, and the melody is complete. Outside, thunder muttered faintly over London, echoing the unfinished chord still vibrating in the air. Poirot turned back to the table, his face unreadable. The rhythm quickens. Soon, mes amis, the harmony will resolve, and one of you will find it unbearable. The unfinished chord still lingered in the air like a wound refusing to close. Poirot stepped closer to the piano, the soles of his shoes whispering against the carpet. Encore, he said softly. Play the same phrase again, monsieur. Exactly as before. Lake's trembling fingers obeyed. The melody returned, halting, uncertain, as though the keys themselves recoiled from their own sound. Poirot bent slightly, watching not the hands, but the man's reflection in the lacquered lid. Bon, he murmured. Now we listen to truth when it thinks it can hide in repetition. Lady Dane rose sharply. Must you torment us with theatrics? He's shaken, can't you see? Poirot lifted a hand. I see everything, madame. That is precisely the difficulty. He turned his gaze upon her. You will allow the music. It is in harmony that guilt exposes itself. The next few notes faltered, struck dissonantly. Poirot's head inclined toward the sound. "There," he said quietly. "The wrong note. Played when fear touched memory." Lake's hand froze on the keyboard. "I can't— No, you cannot continue," said Poirot gently, "because when you touch that key, you remember the moment Sir Reginald fell." "I swear I had nothing to do with it," Lake cried. "He was kind to me. He offered me work, patronage." "Ah," said Poirot, stepping nearer, "and withdrawal of such patronage, it would have been ruin." The pianist's throat tightened. He changed his mind about the London recital. Said I was unreliable." "Unreliable," Poirot repeated softly. A cruel word to a man of art. "And yet it was not you who proved unreliable, but he, n'est-ce pas? He promised, and then he revoked. You had motive enough to wish him silence." Lady Dane moved forward quickly. "You can't accuse him. It's monstrous." "Madame," said Poirot, "I accuse no one. I merely arrange the pieces upon the chessboard. The move itself, they make it." He gestured lightly toward the grand piano's surface, where a fine mist of condensation shimmered beneath the heat of the lamps. Poirot drew his finger through it. "Observe the moisture. It forms only when cold glass meets warmth, a glass recently lifted from ice. Monsieur Lake, was it not you who fetched the decanter from the sideboard just before the toast?" Lake's voice broke into a whisper. I helped Grant. The bottle slipped. I steadied it." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Ah, steadied it. Always this word, steady." The butler steadied the glass. The pianist steadied the bottle. Such symmetry cannot be coincidence. Yet each time something steady is touched, chaos follows. Hale leaned closer. "You think the pianist slipped something into the bottle?" Poirot shook his head. "I think he steadied what another had already prepared." The inspector exhaled in frustration. "You're dancing circles." "Not circles," Poirot replied serenely. "Orbits, and soon we shall see which sun they revolve around." He paced slowly to the mantelpiece where the portrait of Sir Reginald loomed. Painted smile, the silver cup glinting. Poirot studied it for a long moment. "He holds the same cup that fell tonight. It is symbolic, oui, the man who could not drink from his own success." Charles spoke suddenly. "He deserved worse. He ruined people, Inspector. Kept them dangling, waiting for inheritance or approval that never came." Lady Dane gasped. "Charles!" But Poirot's expression did not change. "It is good, this honesty. Anger purifies the air. Continue." The young man's voice trembled with years of suppressed rage. "He humiliated my father, then left us dependent. Even tonight, this ridiculous celebration, he made me fetch cigars like a servant." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "you still called him uncle." "I owed him that much," Charles muttered. "Or perhaps," said Poirot, "you owed yourself the illusion of duty." The nephew's shoulders sagged. The clock on the mantel ticked louder now, its rhythm perfectly aligned with the rain outside. Poirot turned back to Hale. "Tell me, Inspector, was the study upstairs searched?" "Not yet. We sealed the floor till morning." "Then we go now." Lady Dane shook her head. "Must we?" "Truth, madame, grows impatient when left alone in a study." Hale nodded curtly and led the way. Poirot followed with small, deliberate steps, the faint scent of gardenia clinging to his sleeve like a ghost determined to accompany him. The others trailed behind, subdued, their footsteps muffled by carpet. The study door opened onto a room of masculine order, books in neat rows, a writing desk, a globe half turned toward Cairo. Poirot inhaled deeply. The air here, different, non? No perfume, only ink, paper, dust. It smells of secrecy that wished to remain respectable. Hale went to the safe. Locked. Poirot's eyes drifted toward the floor, where a small brass key lay beneath the corner of a rug. He stooped and retrieved it with a faint smile. Order, you see, never hides far. He fitted the key into the lock. The safe yielded with a quiet click. Inside lay a single envelope marked Insurance, Personal Effects, Cairo, and a folded document beneath it. Poirot took out both. Read, Hale said. Poirot scanned the document, his brows arching. A will, dated last week. The nephew inherits all, save for a modest annuity to Madame. Lady Dane turned pale. He told me nothing of this. Charles stared, speechless. I didn't know. Poirot folded the paper carefully. No, monsieur. But someone did. The envelope here, it was unsealed. Inside, a copy of the insurance schedule for the stones. Their value, quite astonishing. Enough to tempt any man who feared disinheritance. He replaced the papers with exact precision, locking the safe again. We returned to the dining room. There, the scent of gardenia will again speak. They retraced their steps. The palm room awaited, dimmer now, candles guttering low. Poirot paused at the threshold. Mon Dieu, do you feel it? The air thicker, the scent stronger. It is not imagination. Someone has reopened the bouquet. Hale crossed swiftly to the table. The flowers indeed were disturbed. Stems shifted, petals bruised anew. Who touched these? Poirot demanded. No one answered. Then, from the far end, the maid stepped forward timidly. Beg pardon, sir. Her ladyship said they were wilting. I was to refresh them with water. Poirot's gaze fixed upon the crystal vase. And you obeyed? Yes, sir. He approached, peering into the water. Tiny specks floated on the surface. Familiar, dull, granular. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, the perfume, the water, the same residue. The killer believes in continuity. He turned toward the widow, his eyes kind yet unyielding. Madame, I beg you do not faint. It is most inconvenient during revelation. Lady Dane's breath caught. You can't mean... I mean, Poirot said quietly, that love may kill more delicately than hate, and that this fragrance, which we have followed like a trail of sorrow, has led us precisely to its source. The room fell into silence. Only the rain continued its slow applause against the window. The silence in the palm room deepened until even the rain seemed to pause, as if London itself waited for what Poirot would say next. He stood at the head of the table, eyes lowered toward the vase, his reflection shimmering among the white petals floating in their poisoned bath. Madame, he said softly, when one waters flowers, it is usually to preserve life. Yet here, he gestured gently, one restores the perfume of death. Lady Dane's hand trembled against the back of her chair. You are cruel, Monsieur Poirot. No, he replied. I am orderly. Cruelty is merely disorder that has been left too long unattended. He dipped the corner of a napkin into the vase, lifted it, and held it beneath his nose. The same compound, Inspector Hale. Our friend from the laboratory will confirm it. A slow-reacting narcotic derivative. Rare, but not unknown to the apothecary who values fragrance more than conscience. Hale frowned. So the poison wasn't in the champagne alone. Poirot inclined his head. The glass was the stage, the scent, the curtain that hid the trick. Sir Reginald did not merely drink death. He breathed it. Each petal released a particle invisible to the eye. A little too much perfume, a little less conscience. Lady Dane stared at him in horror. You think I put poison in the flowers, in my own bouquet? I think, said Poirot quietly, that you replaced one bloom before the dinner began. The gardenia that now lies crushed beneath the terrace door. Her breath caught. How could you possibly know that? Poirot's eyes glinted. Because, madame, when you leaned over your husband as he fell, the clasp on your brooch left a faint impression of the missing stem, one that did not match the bouquet's symmetry. You wore 2 flowers, not one. Hale's gaze snapped to her lapel. She's only got one now. Precisely, Poirot said. The second, treated with the same solution that masked the champagne's odor, was crushed underfoot during her attempt to remove evidence from the terrace. Lady Dane's voice rose, desperate. You have no proof of such madness. The entire room smelled of perfume. It could have come from anywhere. Poirot's reply was soft, almost pitying. From anywhere, yes, but not from anyone. Perfume is as personal as handwriting, and tonight the scent followed only you. Charles stepped forward angrily. Stop it! She's been through enough. My aunt's no killer. Poirot turned toward him. Then perhaps you will explain why her maid refreshed the bouquet only after the moment of death. And on her instruction? The maid's voice quivered. I didn't know, sir. She said the flowers had wilted. They had wilted, Poirot murmured, but only because the poison within them had exhausted itself. When replaced in water, it released its final confession. A shudder passed through the room. The pianist, pale as parchment, whispered, So he was doomed before he raised his glass. Oui, said Poirot. He was doomed the moment the perfume entered the room. Lady Dane sank into a chair, eyes fixed upon the flickering candles. You make me sound like a monster, but he deserved punishment. You know nothing of the man he was. Then enlighten us, Poirot said quietly. Her voice, though trembling, gained strength. He lied to everyone. The stones from Cairo, those were not relics at all, but stolen treasures. He meant to sell them abroad, to ruin Charles with scandal if he objected. I found the correspondence in his study. I begged him to stop. He laughed in my face. Poirot nodded slowly. And so, like many who suffer under tyranny, you mistook justice for deliverance. Tears welled in her eyes. He ruined my life years ago. I was never more than an ornament on his arm. Even this dinner. He said it would be his resurrection. Perhaps it was. Charles placed a hand on her shoulder. Aunt, please, don't say another word. But Poirot's voice cut softly through the plea. She must, monsieur, for it is not confession we seek. It is understanding. Without it there is no order, only chaos disguised as sorrow. He circled the table once, pausing before the portrait again. Observe, Inspector. The silver cup he holds, symbol of triumph, and beneath it, engraved, the motto, Fidèle jusqu'à la mort, faithful unto death. Irony, perhaps, or prophecy. Hale exhaled. You're saying she killed him for moral reasons? Poirot gave a small shrug. For moral excuse. There is a difference. Yet I still perceive one contradiction. He turned back to Lady Dane. If you wished him dead, madame, why hide the act in fragrance and toast? Why not a simple glass, a single dose? She looked at him through tears. Because I wanted him to speak first, to raise his glass to the past, as he always did. I wanted him to bless the thing that would destroy him. The words hung in the air like ash. Poirot regarded her a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, very softly, he said, Mon Dieu. Even vengeance desired order. He gestured toward Hale. Inspector, take care that she is not alone tonight. The law may be merciful. Conscience will not. Hale nodded grimly, signaling the constable at the door. Lady Dane made no resistance as they approached. She only whispered, It was for peace. I wanted silence. Poirot's reply came like a benediction. And instead, madame, you have created echo. As the officers led her away, the rain began again, soft and rhythmic against the window. Poirot watched it, motionless, until the sound merged once more with the lingering scent of gardenia. So fragile a thing, perfume, he murmured. It fades even as it betrays. Hale stood beside him. You think it's over? Poirot did not turn. Over? Non. The truth? She's a patient lady. But sometimes she withholds her final word. There remains still a question of symmetry, mon ami. The bottle's neck outside, the residue on the glass. These do not yet speak the same language. He looked toward the sealed decanter under the dome, its bubbles now stilled forever. There is one more act to this composition, I think, and perhaps, he said quietly, the melody has not finished with us yet. Poirot's reflection wavered in the glass dome that covered the decanter, his gaze fixed upon the imprisoned bottle as if listening to its silence. The room had grown colder. Even the rain's rhythm against the window sounded cautious, deliberate. Hale shifted beside him, impatient. "You've proved motive, means, confession," the inspector muttered. "What more symmetry do you need?" Poirot's eyes did not move. "The truth must balance upon all three legs, mon ami, the act, the intention, and the mechanism. One still wobbles. The bottle, she is the liar." Hale frowned. "You think the poison wasn't in it?" "I think," said Poirot, "that she was not the one who placed it there." The faint gasp came from Charles Dane. "What? You've just had her taken away?" Poirot turned, his voice calm as candlelight. "Oui, monsieur, because she believed herself guilty. Yet belief and guilt are not twins. The mind may claim the act that another commits, out of remorse, or love, or despair. But the matter of the bottle, that belongs to reason." He motioned toward the decanter. "We shall look again, but this time with memory." Hale removed the glass dome carefully. Poirot bent low, examining the neck beneath the light. "Inspector, you see this tiny crease near the rim? Looks like nothing." "It looks," Poirot said, "like a second seal applied over an older one. Someone replaced the cork before the dinner after draining the original content." Charles stepped forward. "You think someone else tampered with it earlier?" "Not think, monsieur. No. The butler reported the cork pale gold. Yet Bollinger's foil is brown, you remember?" "Yes, but he said he borrowed foil from another bottle." Poirot straightened. A convenient lie, told by a man terrified to speak truth. He poured from a vessel he did not prepare. Hale rubbed his jaw. "You're saying Grant knew the bottle was wrong?" "No," he suspected. "But the English servant, he is trained to obey symmetry of service, not of conscience." Poirot crossed to the sideboard and lifted the champagne opener, the one Grant had claimed to wipe clean. Its metal gleamed faintly under the chandelier, but in one crevice a darker smear lingered. Poirot touched it with a napkin, then held it beneath the light. "Not champagne pulp," he murmured. "Sugar, perhaps?" "No, crystallized resin, from sealing wax. Someone resealed the bottle by hand." Hale gave a low whistle. "And that's not something Lady Dane could have done unnoticed." "Precisely." Poirot's gaze drifted toward the pianist, who had sat silent, hands folded in his lap. "Monsieur Lake, you assisted with the wine service earlier. You fetched ice, did you not?" Lake's throat moved. "Yes. And when you steadied the bottle, did you notice it felt warm?" The man blinked. "Warm? Yes, slightly. I thought it odd." "Odd indeed," Poirot said softly. "For poison of that composition requires heat to dissolve." Charles's voice broke through the hush. "You mean he mixed it himself? Or allowed another to do so while believing it harmless?" "Perhaps," Poirot said, eyes narrowing. "A tonic for his nerves, prepared by an admirer." Lady Dane's absence now felt immense in the room, like a stage missing its star. The scent of her perfume lingered faintly, but beneath it, Poirot sensed another note. Stale smoke, the residue of burnt wax. He turned sharply. "Inspector, fetch the waiter who served the courses. Quickly." Moments later, the young waiter entered, pale and bewildered. "Yes, sir?" Poirot's tone softened. "Courage, mon garçon. When you cleared the dessert plates, did you notice anything unusual upon the tray from the sideboard?" He thought hard. "Only a stub of sealing wax, sir. I tossed it away. It smelled strong, like perfume." Hale swore under his breath. Poirot nodded slowly. Ah, the perfume of gardenia was everywhere, was it not? Even the sealing wax wished to imitate innocence. He turned to Lake. Monsieur, where were you between the first course and the toast? In the musician's anteroom, Lake said quickly. I tuned the piano. Poirot's brows lifted. Tuned? But the piano had been played during the cocktail hour. It required no adjustment. The pianist's eyes darted toward the terrace door, still ajar to the rain's scent. I needed a moment alone, he muttered. Indeed, said Poirot. To transfer a powder from vial to bottle, perhaps. And afterward, you steadied what your conscience could not. Lake rose suddenly, his chair scraping the floor. That's a lie. Poirot's voice did not rise. Then tell us the truth, monsieur. The dead man promised you success. You wished to repay him, to help him feel strong again. He told you his nerves failed him, asked for his special restorative. Bitter but quick. You prepared it faithfully, not knowing its power. The powder given to you by whom? Lake's lips trembled. I can't. You must. Tears gathered in his eyes. Lady Dane, she said it was a sedative to keep him calm during speeches. I swear I believed her. She said he'd been unwell all day. I never meant... Poirot's expression softened, tinged with melancholy. Ah, mon pauvre artiste. You were the hand of tragedy, not its mind. Charles whispered. Then she was guilty. Oui, Poirot said, but not alone. She designed the idea of mercy. You executed it with ignorance. Two halves of intention, one moral, one mechanical. Together, they formed perfection. The inspector closed his notebook grimly. You'll testify to that? Oui, but gently, Poirot said. The law will deal with her, the conscience with him. I meddle only with the balance. He returned to the decanter, placing the dome back upon it. There, let the bottle rest. It has told its tale. The room seemed to exhale. The rain outside had softened to mist, faintly perfumed now with that same lingering sweetness. Gardenia, fading at last into night. Poirot stood still, listening. Do you hear it, Inspector? Silence, the true symmetry restored. But Hale shook his head. You make it sound poetic, Poirot. There's nothing poetic about a man dead on a carpet. Poirot smiled faintly. No. Yet even tragedy, when balanced, becomes peace. He looked once more toward the portrait of Sir Reginald, the silver cup catching the candlelight like an echo of triumph. Then he said quietly, Tomorrow, when the morning sun touches that frame, it will gleam again. But tonight it watches only its own reflection and wonders who truly raised the final toast. The candle nearest the portrait sputtered once, its flame bending as though bowing to the truth just named. Poirot's gaze lingered on that flicker. You see, Inspector, he murmured, even the light grows weary of falsehood. Hale closed his notebook with a snap. Then that's the end of it. We've got the lady in custody, the boy for questioning, and a room full of witnesses. Ah, Poirot said, turning delicately toward him. When the Englishman says the end of it, it is always the beginning of consequence. There remains, mon ami, the echo, the thing that truth leaves behind. The air stirred again with that faint, decaying perfume. The scent had thinned now, but it clung stubbornly to fabric and memory alike. Poirot brushed his sleeve as if to dislodge it, then stepped toward the window. Outside, Claridge's courtyard gleamed like a mirror of rain. A constable moved through the mist, carrying away the evidence boxes. Poirot watched in silence until the footfalls disappeared. Inspector, he said at last, you will see that Lady Dane is not to be questioned until morning. Fatigue clouds precision. Hale hesitated. She's confessed in her own way. Confession is not comprehension, Poirot replied. To say I did it is easy. To know what one has done, that, mon cher, is agony. He moved back to the table where the champagne glass still stood beneath its dome. The flicker of candlelight traced delicate arcs across the surface, refracting like trapped constellations. Poirot lifted the dome gently, inhaling. "The scent fades," he said softly. "Soon it will vanish altogether, and then, perhaps, the guilt with it." Charles, who had remained silent since the revelation, spoke suddenly. "You said the truth leaves an echo. What echo could there be now? The scandal alone will destroy us." Poirot regarded him with quiet gravity. "Destruction, monsieur, is merely the cost of symmetry restored. Your uncle lived a life of deceit and died by the same geometry. It is not ruin. It is equilibrium." The young man's jaw tightened. "That's easy for you to say. You're not left with the wreckage." "No," Poirot said gently, "but I tidy it nonetheless." He turned toward the grand piano, still open, keys glinting like white teeth under the chandelier. "There is one sound yet unresolved. Play again, Monsieur Lake." The pianist looked up, startled. "Now?" "Yes. For truth, she hates unfinished music." Lake's trembling hands found the keys. A soft waltz emerged, hesitant at first, then deepening into something mournful. The melody seemed to draw the scent of gardenia into rhythm, the lingering sweetness and the bitter trace beneath. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "You see, it is as I thought. Even remorse has tempo." Hale muttered, "You'll have us all writing poetry next." "Poetry," said Poirot, opening his eyes, "is simply precision that has learned emotion." He crossed to the fireplace, where the last of the logs smoldered. "Now, one final question remains." Hale groaned. "Another. Always another, my friend. The good detective, he's like the conductor, never satisfied until every instrument has bowed." Poirot lifted the poker, shifting the ash. Beneath it, something gleamed faintly. A small metal cylinder, warped by heat. Hale blinked. "What the devil's that?" Poirot stooped and retrieved it with a handkerchief. "Ah, a match case. Mon Dieu, how careless is guilt. She cleans the glass, the table, the vase, but forgets the fire." He examined it under the light. "Engraved initials, R.D. Sir Reginald Dane himself. And yet, Inspector, our witnesses never saw him smoke tonight." Charles frowned. "He gave up cigars months ago." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "Then this match case, used tonight, belongs not to him, but to one who wished to seem him. Look." He opened the lid. Inside, resin again, hardened by heat. A trace of the sealing wax we discovered. Hale let out a low whistle. "So someone sealed the poison bottle here, by the fire." "Exactement," said Poirot. "And who had cause to linger by this hearth while the others prepared the toast?" Charles' voice came quietly. "Grant, the butler. He fetched the cigars." Poirot smiled without triumph. "There is our symmetry complete. The servant obeyed, the lady intended, the artist executed. 3 hands, 1 death." Hale swore softly. "You mean he knew?" "He suspected the contents, perhaps. He feared dismissal, perhaps worse. So he resealed the bottle, believing he could delay catastrophe. But the chemistry of conscience is unstable. In trying to prevent a crime, he completed it." The inspector exhaled. "And now he's gone." "Gone?" "Left with the police convoy, escorting the evidence van." Poirot's head tilted. Then the echo moves outward. He turned once more to the window. The mist beyond was denser now, the street lamps dissolving into gold halos. Poirot's reflection floated faintly upon the glass. Small, still, unyielding. "Do you smell it, Inspector?" he asked softly. Hale sniffed. "Nothing but damp air." "Exactly. The gardenia is gone. The air is clean. That is the scent of closure." The pianist's final note faded, trembling on the edge of silence. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to balance. Grief, relief, exhaustion in perfect equipoise. Poirot folded his hands. "And yet," he murmured, "somewhere beyond that rain, the echo continues. It is faint, but it exists, waiting, perhaps, to remind us that order is never permanent. Hale gave a tired smile. "You'd drive a saint mad with that talk." "No," said Poirot gently. "Only a guilty man." He reached forward and closed the piano lid with a soft click, as final as a verdict. "Come, my friend, let us rest. Tomorrow, we tidy the soul as we tidy the evidence." Outside, a carriage wheel splashed through the puddles, and the sound seemed to mimic a quiet applause that faded into mist. Poirot turned off the last lamp, leaving only the reflection of the extinguished candles in the glass. Ghosts of light, suspended between memory and peace. The soft click of the extinguished lamp left only the shimmer of rain reflected through the window, drawing silver bars across Poirot's face. He stood a moment in stillness, the faint rhythm of the storm ticking like a metronome to his thoughts. "Inspector," he said finally, "before we rest, indulge me one final walk to the service corridor." Hale groaned. "At this hour?" "At every hour, the truth works overtime," Poirot replied. He lifted his hat from the back of a chair and gestured toward the door. "It will be brief." The corridor beyond the palm room was narrow and dim, its brass sconces reduced to low glows that painted the walls in tired amber. The scent of polish and cold rain lingered there, beneath it the faintest ghost of the gardenia, fainter now, as if fleeing. Hale followed reluctantly. "If you're after the butler, he's halfway to Scotland Yard by now." "Perhaps," Poirot murmured, "but guilt often travels more slowly than a police van." They turned the corner where the service entrance opened to the delivery yard. Water pooled on the stone floor. Muddy footprints ran across it in a staggered pattern. Poirot knelt, tracing the edges with a small penlight. "Two sets," he observed. "One of the constables, broad, recent, and another, narrower, overlapping but leading the other way." "Could be anyone from the staff," said Hale. "No," said Poirot. "This shoe, expensive, custom leather, faintly creased by the instep, the mark of one who stands for ceremony, not labor." He rose, brushing off his knees. "Our good butler, he has not yet left." As if on cue, a faint metallic sound echoed from beyond the half-open loading door, a latch, or perhaps the closing of a box. Poirot signaled for silence, and the two men stepped forward. Outside, beneath the sheltering arch, Grant crouched by the police van, a lantern propped beside him. In his hands, he held the evidence crate. "Grant," Hale barked, "what in blazes are you doing?" The butler froze. His face turned toward them, expression caught halfway between dignity and despair. "Inspector, I was instructed—" Poirot's voice cut softly through his lie. "Instructed by whom, monsieur? By conscience, perhaps?" The man hesitated, then lowered the crate gently to the ground. "I wanted to ensure nothing was damaged, sir. The decanter, it seemed delicate." Hale stepped forward. "You were tampering with evidence." "No," Grant's voice cracked. "I swear, I only meant to—" Poirot moved closer, studying him with quiet pity. "To retrieve the match case you dropped in the fire, perhaps, or to remove what it contained before the chemist discovers it." Grant's composure crumbled. "I thought it harmless," he burst out. "The lady gave me a phial. She said it was her husband's tonic to be mixed in the champagne. He used it after dinner every night. I only warmed it by the fire, as instructed. But when I poured, it clouded the glass. I panicked. I resealed the bottle and prayed it would pass unnoticed." Poirot nodded slowly. "You sought to undo what had already been done, and so completed it instead. C'est tragique." Hale's tone was colder. "You realize that makes you an accessory to murder?" Grant bowed his head. "I realize it makes me a fool." Poirot touched the man's shoulder lightly. "Folly is the seed of tragedy, my friend. Intent grows crooked when fear waters it." He turned to the crate, lifting the lid with delicate care. Inside, the champagne glass and vase were cushioned in cloth, but beneath them, tucked between reports, lay a folded slip of paper. Poirot drew it out and unfolded it. "Ah," he whispered. "At last, the missing refrain." Hale peered over his shoulder. "What is it?" "A bill," said Poirot, "for sealing wax and perfumed essence, purchased yesterday morning from the chemist in Albemarle Street. The signature, Grant." The butler's voice was barely audible. "She asked me to fetch them. I didn't question why." "Of course not," said Poirot. "Servants are trained not to question, and thus the perfect crime was born, not from hatred, but habit." The rain intensified, hissing upon the cobblestones. Poirot pocketed the paper carefully. "Inspector, this completes the pattern. Lady Dane conceived. Monsieur Lake performed. This man executed. Each believed himself servant to mercy, and yet mercy, when blind, is the cruelest master of all." Grant sank onto a crate, shoulders shaking. "Will she hang?" Poirot's eyes softened. "The law decides. But for you, monsieur, there may be leniency. You acted from fear, not malice. Perhaps even the English court will recognize the difference." Hale nodded curtly. "We'll take his statement at once." Poirot watched as they led the butler toward the waiting carriage. The lantern light flickered against the wet stone, casting rippling shadows that twisted like smoke. He stood alone a moment longer, listening to the rain, to the echo of steps fading into night, and to something deeper still, the faint, vanishing trace of gardenia. He lifted his head toward the gray sky. "So," he murmured, "the perfume lingers even in confession. One cannot bury fragrance. It is memory, distilled." As the door to the palm room swung shut behind him, the last candle sputtered out, leaving only the faint reflection of Poirot's silhouette in the window, small, immovable, and hallowed by the restless shimmer of rain. The silence returned, balanced, exact, and absolute. The reflection in the window trembled with each whisper of rain, dissolving Poirot's silhouette into the darkness beyond. He stood motionless, eyes fixed on the faint silver trails sliding down the glass. "It is curious," he said quietly, "how water remembers what perfume forgets." Hale, returning from the courtyard, removed his hat and wiped the damp from his collar. "Grant's given his full statement," he said. "He confirms everything you deduced. The chemist will verify the purchase by morning." Poirot inclined his head, but his gaze remained on the window. "And the lady?" "She's resting under guard," Hale replied. "Doctor says she's sedated. Exhaustion and shock. Won't speak until daylight." "Bon," murmured Poirot. "Let her mind walk through its labyrinth. The walls are of her own making." He turned at last, surveying the once glittering room now dulled to ash and silence. Chairs upturned, napkins abandoned like surrendered flags, champagne congealed into sticky amber pools. "How quickly splendor collapses when order is withdrawn," he said. "One can almost hear morality itself stepping carefully over the debris." Charles, pale and hollow-eyed, emerged from the corner where he had sat unnoticed. "You've torn apart everything," he said hoarsely. "Our name, our honor, her life. Are you satisfied?" Poirot regarded him evenly. "I'm never satisfied, monsieur. Satisfaction implies delight in ruin, and I take none. I've only restored the geometry of truth." "The geometry," Charles repeated bitterly. "Always your damned symmetry." Poirot smiled faintly. "Mais oui, even guilt seeks proportion. You, for instance, you hated your uncle, yet you defended his widow. There is grace in contradiction." The young man's voice cracked. "You think that's grace? It's confusion. I don't know what I feel anymore." "Then you are human," Poirot said gently. "To live with paradox is the price of surviving another's sin." He crossed to the table, retrieving the single remaining gardenia from its vase. The petals were limp now, edges browned, the scent almost gone. "You see, the perfume dies, but it leaves a ghost. always a faint echo, as with conscience. Hale moved closer. And what of the pianist? The poor devil still blames himself. Poirot nodded. He was the obedient instrument. Nothing more. When this matter ends, tell him to return to his music. It will heal him, as music always heals the innocent who have sinned in ignorance. The inspector sighed. You sound almost like a priest. Poirot's lips twitched. No, mon ami. Priests forgive. I merely arrange. A soft creak startled them both, the corridor door opening slightly. Poirot turned. The maid who had tended the flowers stood hesitantly in the threshold, a folded handkerchief in her hand. Beg pardon, sir, she said nervously. I found this while clearing the terrace, just now. Thought it might belong to one of the guests. Poirot motioned her forward. She placed the handkerchief upon the table. In its center was a faint ring, champagne, dried and crystalline. But along one edge, a single embroidered initial gleamed beneath the lamplight. L. Lady Dane? Asked Hale. Poirot shook his head slowly. No, hers are monogrammed E.D. This belongs to another. L for... He paused, eyes narrowing. Lake. The pianist, seated quietly near the door, startled upright. Mine? Impossible. I never left the dining room after he fell. Poirot's voice softened. None, monsieur. You left for one moment. To fetch help, yes? You went toward the terrace doors. I suppose I did, but I dropped nothing. Poirot lifted the handkerchief, inhaling. And yet, here, faint but distinct, the trace of gardenia. You handled the poisoned flower. Lake's face drained of color. I only moved it aside when she dropped it. She told me it had fallen from her dress. And so, said Poirot quietly, you carried death with gallantry. Even chivalry can kill if guided by the wrong heart. The man buried his face in his hands. God forgive me. I never dreamed... Poirot placed the handkerchief gently upon the table. It changes nothing, only completes the picture. A final brush stroke in the composition of guilt. Now the balance is perfect. Hale exhaled. Perfect or not, it's a wretched affair. Poirot smiled sadly. All human symmetry ends in sorrow, mon ami. That is its flaw and its beauty. He set the dying gardenia beside the handkerchief, their pale shapes merging in the dim light. Inspector, when you close this case, remember, justice is not punishment. It is the restoration of quiet. A distant chime struck 4, faint through the rain. Dawn was near, and with it, the unkind clarity of morning. Poirot drew his coat tighter. Come, he said softly. The living need rest, the dead, only silence. They walked toward the corridor. Behind them, the palm room remained in half-light, the champagne glass glimmering faintly beneath its dome, the wilted flower leaning toward it like remorse, seeking reflection. At the door, Poirot paused and looked back once. The scent was nearly gone now, but he smiled, faintly, as though greeting a familiar ghost. Adieu, Mademoiselle Gardenia, he murmured. Your confession was exquisite. He turned the handle and stepped into the corridor's hush. Outside, the rain at last began to ease. Somewhere in the distance, a newspaper boy called the first headlines of morning. The sound, thin and human, cut through the lingering quiet like the first fragile breath of absolution. The cry of the newspaper boy faded into the drizzle, leaving only the whisper of tires along wet pavement. Poirot paused beneath the portico of Claridge's, adjusting the brim of his hat as he looked up at the paling sky. Listen, mon ami, he said softly. The city breathes again. Order returns with the dawn. Hale lit a cigarette, cupping the flame against the wind. I'll admit, your order looks a lot like tragedy to me. Poirot gave a small shrug. Tragedy, yes, but tidy. It is the untidiness of evil that offends me most. Once set straight, even sorrow may rest. The faint scent of rain-washed stone mingled with the ghost of perfume that clung to Poirot's sleeve. He lifted his hand, sniffed once, and smiled faintly. It lingers still, the memory of what has been. "Gardenia?" Hale asked. "Oui. Or remorse. They are much the same fragrance. Both fade only when truth has aired the room." The inspector exhaled smoke into the grey air. "We'll need to file the reports, of course. Lake's testimony, Grant's confession. It all lines up neatly enough." "Neatly," Poirot repeated. Always that word, and yet within its symmetry lies human crookedness. "Did you notice, Inspector, how none of them acted from hatred? They all served affection. Distorted, desperate, but affection nonetheless. Love, twisted slightly, becomes the most efficient poison of all." They began walking along the corridor toward the small sitting room where coffee had been laid out for what remained of the staff. Poirot's patent leather shoes tapped evenly against the tiles, each step measured, deliberate. This crime, he continued, was not of greed. It was of pity, the most perilous sentiment, for it disguises pride as mercy. Hale looked sideways at him. "You think she pitied him?" "She pitied herself," Poirot said. "To end her humiliation, she created an illusion of kindness. Death as deliverance. And thus she gave him both peace and punishment while granting herself purpose. The human heart, Inspector, it is the greatest alchemist. It turns guilt into meaning." They entered the sitting room. The pianist sat by the window, head bowed, hands clasped together as though he feared they might betray him again. The morning light outlined him like a penitent in an empty chapel. Poirot crossed to him. "Monsieur Lake," he said gently, "the night is over. The music must begin again." The man lifted his eyes, hollow with fatigue. "How does one play after such a thing?" "By remembering," Poirot replied, "that each note you strike is a choice for order in a world that prefers chaos. You, who dealt death unwittingly, may now give life deliberately. That, mon ami, is redemption." Lake's throat moved, but he said nothing. His fingers twitched slightly, as though feeling keys that were not there. Poirot smiled. "Good. They already seek the melody." He turned back to Hale, who poured 2 cups of black coffee. "You'll sleep after this, I suppose," the inspector said. Poirot took the cup delicately. "Sleep? Perhaps for 1 hour. But I have learned that when justice is achieved, the mind rests more fully than the body ever can." They drank in silence a moment. The scent of the coffee, bitter and clean, replaced the memory of Gardenia entirely. The night's illusions, perfume, champagne, and deceit, had at last been washed away. Then, softly, Hale said, "You almost pity her." Poirot looked into the dark surface of his cup. "Almost," he agreed, for she sought beauty even in destruction. To her mind, death was symmetry. She could not endure imperfection, her husband's cruelty, her nephew's weakness, her own aging reflection. So she composed her final harmony. A toast, a bloom, a breath. And in doing so, Hale muttered, she broke 3 lives instead of 1. "Oui," said Poirot, setting his cup down, "because she forgot that symmetry is cold. It excludes compassion." Outside, the rain softened to a mist. The first light touched the window, revealing the glistening cobblestones where the evidence van had stood. Poirot rose and walked to the glass, staring down as the puddles reflected pale gold from the awakening sky. The bottle, the flower, the glass, all fragments of a single design, he said quietly. But designs end where hearts begin to ache. That, Inspector, is the truth one must never forget. Hale joined him at the window. "You ever tire of it?" he asked. "The endless sorting of human motives like broken glass on a table?" Poirot smiled faintly. "No, because sometimes, among the shards, one finds reflection, something whole enough to remind one why order must prevail. A silence settled between them. The pianist began, almost unconsciously, to hum a few bars of a slow, haunting waltz, the same melody that had faltered during the night. It rose now, steady and pure, drifting through the room like forgiveness. Poirot closed his eyes, listening. The sound merged with the gentle hiss of rain, the two weaving together in a final cadence. "Do you hear, Inspector?" he murmured. "The echo resolves itself." Hale nodded. "Aye, and so does the case." Poirot opened his eyes and straightened his cuffs. "Yes, mon ami. The case, but not the lesson." He turned toward the door, pausing once to glance back at the dying embers of the night's chaos, now subdued by the order of morning. "It is always thus," he said softly. "One begins with confusion, one ends with quiet, and in between lies the very measure of the soul." The air smelled only of rain now, fresh and unburdened. Poirot stepped into the corridor without another word, the faint click of his shoes fading toward daylight. The corridor breathed with faint echoes of footsteps. Poirot's alone now, steady, clipped, almost reverent against the marble floor. The dawn light pressed through the tall windows in slender golden bars, finding the dust that still hung in the air. Each mote turned briefly radiant before fading again, like thoughts too small to confess. He moved toward the lobby, his hat balanced in one hand, the other brushing absently at his sleeve where the last whisper of gardenia remained. "The perfume, she lingers," he murmured. "Always she lingers." Behind him, Hale caught up, coat collar turned against the cool draft. "Car waiting outside, Poirot. Paperwork's on the way. They'll want your official statement before midday." Poirot smiled faintly. "Statements are for policemen, mon ami. I make only order and observation." Hale managed a weary grin. "You'll make a philosopher yet." "Aye, but I am one already," said Poirot, stepping aside as a porter hurried past with linens. "Every detective must be. The solving of a crime is the solving of character. One cannot untangle evidence without touching the soul." The lobby doors parted. Morning lay beyond. Rain-smoothed streets, faint steam rising from the pavement, and the far-off toll of a church bell rolling through the damp air. Poirot paused at the threshold. "Do you know, Inspector," he said, "what I find most strange about this affair? Not the method, nor even the motive. It is how every participant sought peace, and found only reflection. The lady, the servant, the musician, each mirrored the other's guilt. They killed not one man but their own illusions." Hale slipped his hands into his pockets. "You really believe any of them meant harm?" Poirot turned, his expression soft. "Harm, non. Only balance. But balance, pursued blindly, becomes cruelty. It is a lesson even justice must relearn." They stepped outside. The sky was pearl gray now, the rain reduced to a fine mist that veiled the world like gauze. A waiting cab idled near the curb. Poirot's shoes clicked briskly against the pavement, precise as punctuation. A newspaper boy approached, breath steaming in the chill. "Morning edition, sir. Terrible tragedy at Claridge's," he chirped, waving folded sheets, still damp from ink. Poirot accepted one, glancing briefly at the bold type. "Socialite found dead in midnight toast. Police probe, poison mystery." He smiled faintly. "Ah, déjà, the world arranges its headlines before truth has signed her name." Hale took a paper of his own. "They'll get their story one way or another." "Oui," said Poirot, "but stories are never the same as endings." He folded the newspaper precisely and tucked it beneath his arm. The cab driver touched his cap, waiting. Poirot did not yet move to enter. Instead, he looked once more toward the hotel facade, the polished brass letters, the discreet awnings, the curtained windows now innocent of last night's scene. "How strange," he said quietly, "that even tragedy requires etiquette. The world tidies its crime before breakfast. Hale gave a tired laugh. I'll settle for tidying my reports. Poirot's eyes glimmered with amusement. You are a man of utility, Inspector. I, alas, am a man of order, and sometimes that is the lonelier profession. He leaned slightly on his cane, though he did not need it. Do you recall what the lady said? That she wished only silence? In the end, she has achieved it. But silence, I think, is never peace. It is merely the pause between truths. The sound of the city was returning now. Carriage wheels, voices, the sigh of a waking metropolis. Yet beneath it all, Poirot could still sense that subtle resonance, the faint vibration of last night's chaos resolved into harmony. He straightened, a small smile touching his lips. It is enough. The world, she may breathe again. Come on, Hale said gently. Let's get you out of this rain before your symmetry rusts. Poirot chuckled, the sound brief but genuine. Rust, mon cher? Never. Even the smallest imperfection, I polish until it gleams. He stepped into the cab. The inspector followed, and the door closed with a soft thud. Through the window, Claridge's receded, its grand facade dissolving into the mist, its secrets sealed once more behind luxury's calm smile. Inside the cab, Poirot removed his hat and rested it upon his knees. There will be another case tomorrow, he said, half to himself. Another pattern awaiting completion. Hale nodded. And you'll be there, putting it right. Poirot's gaze drifted toward the blurred city beyond the glass. As long as men love wrongly and fear elegantly, there will always be work for Hercule Poirot. The cab turned a corner. For a moment, a breeze slipped through the half-open window. Cool, faintly fragrant. Poirot inhaled, smiling. The scent was no longer gardenia, but London itself. Rain, coal, and the first aroma of fresh bread from a nearby shop. He closed his eyes. At last, he murmured, the perfume of life without deceit. The cab rolled onward into the pale gold of morning, carrying him toward the next symmetry waiting to be disturbed.